Chapter 2, Be a Mirror. So, mirroring is a technique, it's the first tool set that we are getting introduced to. So, let's understand why mirroring is important and what is mirroring. To understand that, we'll have to understand this paper by George Miller. If you type in Google the magical number 7 plus or minus 2, it's a pretty interesting paper which basically says that in our mind, we can at most deal with 7 plus or minus 2 things simultaneously. And beyond that, we can get overwhelmed. And so, um, at some point, there is a level of schizophrenia in each one of us, right? It's a disorder that affects our ability to think, feel, and behave clearly. And there is probably a link between the two, which is if we cannot deal with more than 7 things at a given point in time, that we are dealing with some sort of a disorder and we can easily get overwhelmed. So, that context is useful. This finding that we can deal with very limited piece of information, and if more and more inputs are given, that we lose the ability to think, feel, and behave clearly. So when that happens, it's very important for us to figure out how we first quieten our mind and also quieten the mind of the person that you're negotiating with. Because if you realize when you go into a negotiation with someone, there are many things going on in their mind. And if you want to quieten it, the first thing you have to do is first quieten yourself, quieten your mind. And the way you quieten your mind is through a powerful technique of mirroring. And when you mirror, you actively listen to the other person. You're not thinking about what's going on in your mind. You're actively listening, and in a way that makes it easier for you to listen by mimicking some of the words that the other person's saying, by actually paying full attention. Even your body language, your tone, your speech, your attitude, everything is mirroring the other person. When that happens, the trust is built, a bond is built wherein the other person feels safe. They feel comfortable to start solving the problem together. So mirroring is, in a sense, is the art of active listening so that you build that bond between you and the other person which with you are negotiating. And when that bond happens, that bond of trust is the bridge with which problems can be solved together. So that's mirroring. And when we do this, we are building some sort of similarity. When we talk in the same words that the other person used, maybe we repeat the last few words that they have said, or the crux of what they're trying to share. We sit the way that they sit, right? We use the same tone. And there are various types of tones that are also described in this chapter. The late night FM DJ tone versus a powerful direct tone, which has some sort of response which is aggressive, but at the same time there's a playful tone as well, a positive playful tone. So different types of tone can have different responses. So how you build similarity is very important. It basically gets you to disagree without being disagreeable. So you have that bond created. And when you are listening actively, you are going with this full mindset of discovery. You want to figure out the other person's strategy, and you want to extract as much information and observe as much as possible without any assumptions. So don't go in with a lot of assumptions. We do go in with a lot of assumptions most of the time, which causes a lot of problems. So without any assumptions, be an open mind, 100% being there to listen is probably the first step of mirroring. And it's not easy to listen. We easily get distracted. We engage in selective listening, only hear what we think is the right thing, and multiple biases that we talked about in the previous chapter, and everything comes in play. So listening is very difficult. So listening with full attention, without biases, and for consistency, and not for consistency, but for the truth, is very important skill to build. And so when you do that, you calm the other person down. First, you calm yourself down. You're the power of 7 plus or minus 2 paperwork that we talked about. So you quieten yourself down. Your voice in your mind is clear. Then you quieten the other person. And then you have built this bond which allows you to negotiate. um, and so focusing fully is the key. And when they feel that you are fully listening, that bond feels safe. They feel a safe space where they can talk and talk and talk and talk. Your goal is to make them talk, talk, and talk so that you understand the strategy, so that you can actually solve the problem well and you can actually understand the crux of what they're trying to negotiate, right? And that's where the conversation starts. Negotiation, the first step is a conversation. The conversation has to start. So you have to create a situation where the other person is willing to talk. So understanding and mastering voice tones is very important, right? And in a late night FM music that you might have listened, the tone is very downward, it's soft, it's soothing. That's the kind of tone you typically want to have by default in a negotiation, not a powerful direct tone which can have confrontation. Even a playful problem solving tone with a smile adds a lot of signal. We're all signaling. Everything that we do, how we feel, we are signaling to the universe, to the person who is listening. Even in a phone conversation, if the other person is not listening, can't see you, but even if you smile, your tone changes, right? So smiling, right now I'm smiling, right? So it changes the tone, it builds that bridge with the other person. It's very important. But in a sense, what you're doing with mirroring is you're creating reciprocity. If you are good to the other person would want to give you back. If you give them the control, if you make them feel safe, the other person will give you back. That's the psychology which this chapter is exploiting, psychology of reciprocity. So you make the other person feel safe, they would want to make you feel safe. If you solve the problem, they would want to solve the problem. So if you give control, they'll give you control back. And so you get what you want. So let's take an example of a mirror conversation. Let's say there's a boss that wants you to make 2 copies of every paperwork, right? And this increases your work week by almost a week more, right? Your effort is increased by a week. You're like, hey, I'm sorry, boss, 2 copies. So here you're starting with I'm sorry. These words are quite important. It makes the other person feel that you listen, and you also used and repeated few words like 2 copies, clarification, right? So now, and you're pausing. When you pause, the other person's like, yes, one for us and one for the customers. So now they've given you clarification instead of just like direct voice. Now they're getting into, the smooth tone, right? But I'm sorry, boss. You're saying that the customer is asking for a copy and that we need one for our use case. And then you pause and then make them feel, is that really needed? Okay, definitely want a copy. Let me check with the client. Okay, absolutely. Thanks for checking. Now now you have consulted. Now you have reciprocated that, hey, you want to give them thanks, and then you're like, hey, where do you want me to store it? It's like, oh, you can store it anywhere. It's like, what, anywhere? You can't say what anywhere, or what do you mean? When you say what do you mean, it's like a different tone. So the tone with which you use this conversation changes things in a pretty big way. So you can say, hey, you can store it in my office, but by the way, let me ask my assistant, and I'll ask them just create digital copies for now. Again, so you went from 2 copies to just digital copies. You reduced your work. You got what you wanted. Similarly, let's say a homework exercise would be prepare a negotiation for getting paid more, right? Like that's an example where you'd want to go prepared. You'd want to think through. You'd want to reciprocate. You'd want to confirm. Whether it's a base pay increase or an equity increase or a bonus increase or whatever that is. So that's a homework exercise. So do that. Prepare well. The art of any negotiation is to go prepared, go with an open mind, listen, mirror, negotiate with understanding the other person's strategy, and as we said, use the power of pauses, power of clarification, power of mirroring, so that the other person feels what you want them to feel. All right. Hopefully, mirror is helpful. I'll see you all in the next chapter. So active listening and mirroring, that was the key summary for this chapter.